Just explain a little bit about why you decided to answer that question today.
Well, I came up in the reshuffle, in the shuffle. So I tried to get a question every week, and it's actually over a year since I got a place on the order paper. So it seemed to me a good thing to do ahead of the Commonwealth Government, Heads of Government meeting. And for this reason, that the government has been very strong, quite rightly, on going after the war criminals who are perpetrating these atrocities in Ukraine. But for 16 years now, these fugitives from Rwandan justice, who are alleged perpetrators of hideous war crimes, have been living in plain sight in the UK. 16 years, neither extradited, as the Rwandans wish, nor tried under British laws. These are terrible crimes of which they are accused. And of course, in Africa, many people say, well, this is because they're not white Europeans. The British judicial system, the British don't care about the fact that these are murdered black Africans. They only care about white Europeans. That's why they take such a strong line in Ukraine. And as a British Member of Parliament, I'm very offended by that, but the evidence is there on the table. 16 years, they've not been sent back to Rwanda, as so many other countries have done with those who the Rwandan government have sought to extradite, and they're not being tried under the British system either, and the police say it will take years and years to address this point, and it isn't good enough, and it's very bad for Britain's international reputation.
And what did you make of the Prime Minister's response to your question?
Well, I mean, you know, he's not obviously very familiar with this issue, but he promised that he would get familiar with this issue, and that was my aim and purpose, that when he goes down to Rwanda, undoubtedly, you know, the president of Rwanda will say to him, you're very happy to send your asylum seekers here. Why aren't you either prosecuting in the UK or sending back to Rwanda these people who are alleged to have committed the most terrible crimes against our citizens?
You mentioned there the deal struck between the UK and Rwanda to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, the first plane due to leave next week, but of course it's had this challenge in the High Courts. Do you think that policy needs to be dropped?
Well, I think that the Rwandans have a very good reputation for helping out with humanitarian situations. They have taken desperate people who were caught off the coast of Libya from the struggle there and give them a new life in Rwanda. And the Rwandans are trying to be helpful in a humanitarian way. They did the same thing for the Israelis. But my issue with the policy is that I don't think it'll work, and it's incredibly expensive for the British taxpayer. I'm not opposed to Britain, if someone comes here illegally, seeks asylum, is processed in the UK and is then turned down for asylum, if then the British wish to deport them to Rwanda and Rwanda's willing to take them, I wouldn't be against that. But this is a policy which will be extremely difficult to implement, will be hideously expensive for taxpayers, and I just don't think it'll work. That's my main objection.
How popular do you think these kind of policies are with the electorate? It felt like for years, in a way, being tough on immigration was been seen as a bit of a badge of honour, something that would always go down well with the population at large. Do you think that's changed?
Well, I think that this is this has brought up a lot of people up short. It's just not the sort of thing we would normally do. And actually, you know, there's no alternative but to do the hard yards of processing people properly, employing more staff to process them when they get here, having a better relationship with the French. I mean, you can't do anything about the core problem, which is people coming across the Channel in a leaky boat, putting themselves into the hands of the modern-day equivalent of the slave trader. That's the prime problem. You've got to have a deal with the French. So that's the second thing you need to do. And you need to revise the 1951 Geneva Convention on Refugees, because that was set up before there was mass travel, before there was climate change-driven migration. And there's really no alternative but to do those hard, difficult things if you're going to get this problem under control. And saying you're going to ship a few of them off halfway around the world, you know, it's not very nice, and it's not really the way Britain does these things.
Another policy where you need to do the hard yards is what's happening in Northern Ireland and the impact of the Northern Ireland Protocol there. Lots of people are extremely concerned about it. The whole administration, of course, not up and running until it is sorted. Now, the government is claiming that it's legal for it to act unilaterally to change parts of the protocol. Do you think, in your view, it is?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, and I would rely on independent legal advice on that point. But I do think that the European Union is being extremely difficult. I think they need to be much more sympathetic and understanding about the issue of the border in Northern Ireland and the problem this is creating, which we do not want to imperil the peace agreements that have been set in Northern Ireland. And I've been in the House of Commons long enough to remember those terrible statements made after atrocities took place. You know, we need to honour the agreements that have been reached. So I think the EU need to be more sensitive. But equally, you know, you don't sign a big international treaty and then a few months later decide you want to go back on your word. And the last thing Britain needs now, when our economy is so stretched at the moment and there are these huge difficulties with the cost of living, is to have a trade war with Europe where the Americans, our closest ally, are on the side of Europe. So this is a time now for very cool heads, very good negotiation and a real understanding by both sides of the issues here. But I do think the European Union is not being as helpful or as sensitive to these big international problems as we have a right to expect.
Now, of course, this week, I think 41% of Conservative MPs voted to say they had no confidence in Boris Johnson. You were one of them. What would you like to see from Boris Johnson going forward to get your trust back in him?
Well, I think he needs to govern in the same way he did when he was Mayor of London. He needs to up his game as Prime Minister and the problems he's seeking to address. I think there's a whole range of things he needs to do. There's a lack of coherence in a lot of policy. These are very big issues to do with energy costs, the cost of living, inflation, growth. You know, the critical thing in the British economy is to increase the level of growth. And we need a laser-like attention from the Prime Minister. And you know, if 32 colleagues change their minds, he will be out of office. But we need to get on with tackling the problems that my constituents have sent me to Westminster to try and address and not go on about this day after day.
Do you think there could be another vote then? You said that it just takes another 32 to change their minds.
Well, there won't be another vote at the moment for a year, and we've got to respect the conventions. That's as things stand, but there's a lot of events. You know, in politics, it's events which come around the corner and surprise you. And the key thing is he's got to get on with the job now of delivering the best possible answers to these very, very serious problems. And this sort of lack of grip on policy has got to be addressed.